Step number 5 is to break down big problems into micro skills. The most frustrating thing for struggling students is knowing that something's wrong, but not knowing exactly what to fix. Oftentimes, it's the way that we're framing problems that's the reason that we're being held back. For example, if I say I'm bad at questions, then it doesn't really give me any clear path for improvement. Instead, I want to identify the micro skills that I would need to improve in order to work on that macro skill of being better at questions. So why is it important to break down a big skill like test-taking skills into all of the individual micro skills? First, vague goals produce vague results. If you have specific targets, it's a lot easier to create measurable improvements. Often, struggling students will say things like, I need to get better at cardiology. Instead, for students that see the fastest improvements, they'll say something like, I need to improve my ability to distinguish between systolic and diastolic heart failure. In other words, instead of saying, I'm just bad at cardiology, they're identifying a micro skill or a micro bit of knowledge that will allow them to improve via deliberate practice. This is how some students make massive improvements seemingly overnight. So you may be wondering, how do I identify my specific weaknesses? To do this, after each practice block, you want to categorize your errors into specific types. First, you want to look at content knowledge gaps, things that you just didn't know. Second, you want to look at application errors, things where you knew the fact but you couldn't apply it. Next, look at your standalone question. Did you misunderstand what was being asked? Were you able to identify or predict in the educational objective what the educational objective was going to be? In addition, how many times did you get stuck between two answer choices and choose wrong? If this is happening to you, you may be being too critical of one of the answer choices. In other words, you're being a lawyer as opposed to being a judge, where you're looking and balancing both answer choices side by side and asking, okay, well, neither of these answers is perfect, but which would make more sense in the context? Finally, look for time management issues. How often were you rushed and missed clues because you were reading the questions too quickly? If you want to get really fancy, you can ask ChatGPT to make a frequency chart so you can see the patterns in your mistakes. Ultimately, you want to find the highest frequency errors, since these are the things that if you fix, you can improve your score dramatically. We had a student who had failed his step 1. He had basically gone in less than 2 months from the bottom 3% to the top 3%. In other words, a 4 standard deviation improvement, basically by identifying all of the errors that he was making and always looking for the biggest, highest leverage mistakes to fix. Specifically, when we did an analysis, we found that he wasn't weak in all of the areas. In other words, he had specific weaknesses. He had weaknesses in chronology identification, he had issues with answer choice elimination, and he had some gaps in basic physiology concepts. What we did is we created targeted exercises for each of those micro skills and built flashcards for each of the knowledge gaps. He ended up with a 92% on his NBME, not from magic overall improvement, but just systematically fixing his individual weaknesses. Despite having failed step 1, he actually matched into urology, which is a super competitive field and is typically not open to people that have failed step 1. However, because he had such a massive improvement in his scores, the programs were able to overlook his failure in step 1. If you're a medical student or a doctor preparing for either the USMLEs or COMLEX or one of your medical board exams, then be sure to sign up for our free 14-step program where we'll walk you through the most efficient ways for you to improve your score in a short period of time. And if you're interested in getting there faster, be sure to book a free call with our team where we'll break down what it is that's holding you back and, if it makes sense, explain how it is that we can help you to get there more efficiently.